Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, the US President-elect Donald Trump escalates his tariff threat, pledging hefty taxes on imports from Mexico, Canada and China from day one of his presidency. Well, Donald Trump's legal woes look like they're mostly behind him as a US judge agrees to drop charges against the president-elect linked to the 2020 US election. Islamabad is under strict lockdown after thousands of supporters of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan flood the streets, demanding his release. Well, clashes with the police have left at least 6 people dead. And the NATO critic, Alan Dershowitz' first-round presidential victory sparks fears that Romania may be set to shift towards the pro-Moscow camp. Hello and welcome to the programme. The US President-elect Donald Trump is pledging big tariffs on the United States' 3 largest trading partners, namely Canada, Mexico and China. Well, he plans to impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico until they clamp down on drugs and migration. Well, Beijing has responded, saying that they remain open to dialogue with the United States. Canada, meanwhile, says it is, quote, essential to the US energy supply. Well, for more, we're joined now by the Canadian-American businessman and Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. I'm assuming you're not particularly surprised because on the campaign trail, after all, Donald Trump said that his favourite word in the English language was none other than tariffs.
I'm not surprised, actually. Security at the border is not just a Mexican-U.S. issue, it's a Canadian-U.S. issue. And for a long time in previous administrations, going back as far as the NORAD agreements, the U.S. has wanted Canada to pay its fair share, as they like to say, to secure the northern border against what was once the USSR and now Russia. So they concern themselves with tying that up. Now, in Trump's case, these tariffs are all about pre-inauguration negotiation, right? Even with NATO, just visited Miami Beach recently. All of this is positioning towards what's going to be the negotiation between Canada and the U.S. around the Mexican-Canadian deal. It's an extension of NAFTA. Most people remember it as that, but this will be the 3rd time it's negotiated. And this is a starting position. What complicates the situation right now is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, had a 2-hour conversation last night with Trump. However, he's on his way out. Trudeau probably isn't going to last another 7 or 8 months. And so unfortunately, the parliamentary system is not quite like the U.S. The end game for a prime minister that's losing a majority mandate is they just throw him out. You saw it happen in England just a few months ago. It's going to happen in Canada. And the real negotiation is going to be with the head of the Conservative Party, a man named Pierre Poilievre, who's currently a private citizen, represents the opposition, but he's the person that will take on this responsibility by the time these negotiations start and Trump is president. So it's a very delicate situation. Obviously, there's no way you can put 25% tariffs on a partner like Canada, where all the food and energy and electricity and gas and oil and paper and minerals and all that stuff flow into the U.S. And so all of this is just a pre-positioning, and it's not a big surprise to anybody. It's just this unique situation where Trudeau is lame duck and the new prime minister is not there yet.
Because that's the situation in Canada. And of course, Canada sounding extremely alarmed by the idea of a 25% tariff, saying it will have a devastating impact on workers and jobs. But it's not just in Canada that it would have a devastating impact on workers and jobs. It would also have a devastating impact on workers in the United States, wouldn't it?
Yes. You know, you have to think about all of this as not a sales tax, not a burden on the American economy at all. The real issue here, you know, sort of the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room is not Canada or Mexico or even the European countries. It's China. The U.S. fact, Europe, I'd argue, is in an economic war with China and has been since 1999 when they came into the WTO making all these promises about playing by the rules, and they've never done that. And so IP theft, cheating, stealing, dumping of commodities in various markets, all of this has come to a head. And during the Biden administration, they didn't take off the tariffs against China. It's just that Trump is now ratcheting it up to get them to the table. Most tariff deals are reciprocal. That's what the agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is. It's a reciprocal tariff agreement. Same with Germany on automotives at 10%. But this China thing is going to DEFCON 1. It's getting really, really extreme. And I expect, rather than risk trade with the U.S., the supreme leader, who only gets to remain supreme if everybody's employed in China, will get over to the U.S. and try and work something out. And that's because Trump is just making it so difficult. And I don't think it's really going to affect the U.S. economy. There hasn't been much effect on tariffs at all. We've had a very strong economy at the consumer level, stock markets at all-time high. It was a lot of political rhetoric. The tariffs would ruin the economy. It just hasn't happened. And now we're going into the end game, or the beginning of the game, depending on which way you want to look at it. But I expect that this will really be all about China and will not have that much effect on the American economy.
So how come China got away with it seemingly lightly with a 10% hike in tariffs, when in fact Donald Trump had talked on the campaign trail about something a bit more like 60%, hadn't he?
Yeah. I mean, the whole presidential election is over and the country's operating as if Trump is already president. You don't see a lot of foreign leaders going to Washington. They're all showing up in Mar-a-Lago right now. So we only have 54 days left. We're going through a holiday season here in the U.S. Trump has almost picked his entire cabinet. I mean, it's incredible at the pace at which he's done this. And most people like the picks. There's a couple of controversial ones, but Trump knows he only has 24 months in which he has a majority mandate, because there are going to be midterm elections, and usually the House flips then, and you don't have as much power. So he's going to try and ram all this stuff through in the next 2 years, and he's got a mandate. He won an incredible, no other way to describe it, than a landslide. I mean, he decimated the Democrats in every swing state and then some, and even won the popular vote. So he's not waiting around to debate anything with the White House or any Democrats. He's just firing up the engines, and he's going to plow right on through town.
The reason given for singling out China relates to the drug fentanyl. And I just want to ask you whether you think that's first of all, is that the real reason? And then I also want to ask you, as an extension of that question, why this is such a serious issue in the United States?
Well, fentanyl has been an issue. Opioid addiction, huge issue. Porous border, Mexico, drug cartels, murders in small American towns. All of this has made headlines in the last 4 months. But it's not just fentanyl. The dumping of commodities in the U.S. market and the lack of IP protection, spyware in the form of TikTok, scheduled to shut down January 19th at midnight, all of this is boiling and simmering just below the surface. And so, this is really about how tough Trump is going to get on China. And he really wants, the Canadians to make sure that once he seals off the Mexican border, Canada is not a problem. So that's what he told Trudeau last night. Trudeau won't be around to execute on that, but the message is clear to the Canadian people. It's not going to be business as usual. They're going to have to spend more money on maintaining that border and not making it porous, because there's been evidence of illegal immigration coming through the Canadian border in Quebec or in British Columbia, all of these places, and so, in Alberta as well. That's a very big open border, so it's going to have a lot more patrolling. Luckily, there's a lot of technology, a lot of drone technology, monitoring technology, infrared technology, satellite technology. This just has to be executed by the Canadians, and it's gonna be made a priority. It's all gonna happen. But fentanyl is, yes, important, but just one issue. And so Trump is just taking an attitude. Border means both borders. It means Canada and it means Mexico.
Sure, and I'm just wondering, I mean, just looking at the Donald Trump lineup for his inner circle, and of course, Elon Musk is a big part of that. I mean, whether you see him having some involvement in this idea about imposing these tariffs, and also what you think he's going to bring to the table, just generally speaking, with regards to government efficiency.
Well, there's never been anything quite like Doge, if that's what you want to make reference to, because it's worth talking about. Two private citizens that have incredible executional skills, particularly in the case of what Elon Musk has achieved. He has a lot of respect within bipartisan votership. I mean, if you want to start saving money in government, it's not just a Republican or Democratic issue. And they want to talk about erasing trillions of dollars of waste. Most people know the federal government's full of waste. It's fat, it's sassy, it's never been controlled, deficits have never been higher. Nothing wrong with that. So you're getting Trump 2.0, which looks like he'll be a little bit more stable. Plus you're adding a whole dash of Doge to make the whole thing more interesting. Most people are going to cut a pretty broad swath for this administration for an extended period of time, at least 2 years, to see what they can achieve. So there's a fair amount of euphoria here in the US right now amongst business leaders. Taxes will remain stable. The regulatory environment will be stripped away. Pretty well everything Biden tried to do will be erased. That's just the nature of presidential politics. We're going to be lighting up natural gas export, LNG, almost immediately. Executive orders will become flying out of the White House on the 21st of January. A lot of change coming. And it really was two different divisions in terms of the vision for each way the country was going to be run between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the voting constituency by a landslide choice decided they would go back the Trump way of doing things. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and just lastly, just to wrap up this conversation, I mean, we have had a pretty decent peek behind the curtain with regards to what Trump 2.0 is going to look like. We've been talking about tariffs, we've been talking about Doge. I mean, what are your sort of forecasts? What are your predictions as to where things head to with regards to job creation and trade deficit reduction under the new Trump presidency?
Well, you can see it now. One index of the optimism is the stock market itself hitting new highs, but there's also a lot of optimism in small business in America, which represents about 62% of job creation. They're waiting to see all the regulations peeled away. The Trump picks for cabinet positions are different than Trump 1.0. Most of these people are seasoned veterans. They're going to be around for the full 4 years. It's not going to be as much volatility. Trump is thinking legacy at this point. This is definitely his last election other than the midterms, but he wants to leave the country better than he found it. Every president does. And he is building a platform within the White House that's going to be remarkably different than the last time. There was a lot of volatility, if you want to use that word. But even he has said, look, I'm not going to make the same mistakes. I'm not going to hire people that don't know what they're doing. I'm going to get veterans that understand the system. He's done that in commerce. He's done that in Treasury. Health is a little controversial with Kennedy, but I actually think Kennedy will make it through the gauntlet because he has a lot of interesting ideas about food choices, of which I'm a huge advocate of. I'm just one person. But the whole idea is 2.0 is a more seasoned Trump, a more stable Trump, a more experienced Trump with an added dash of Doge. So a little extra cleaning fluid, if you want to call it that.
Sure, and just lastly, because I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more question to you, because I think last time you came on our channel, you talked about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin approaching the 100,000 mark, sort of slowly back and forth a little bit, around the 93,000 mark today. But I'm just wondering whether you think the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration's got grand plans to regulate, or what you think they're going to change with regards to cryptocurrency regulation?
Yeah, when I last talked to you, Bitcoin was trading around 60 and it's now around 90. So a huge increase. The optimism around settling the regulatory environment around crypto in the United States and digital payment systems. Gensler's on his way out. We're talking about getting a crypto czar. CFTC, which is the commodities regulator, has been rumored to get more power around things like, is Ethereum a commodity or a security? All these things are going to get resolved. There's a stablecoin act floating around Congress right now to make the American dollar the de facto trading system for digital currency. All of this stuff is coming in the first 24 months. And so that's why you're seeing these markets so optimistic. The granddaddy digital currency, of course, is Bitcoin. It's the one that institutions want. And as soon as it's regulated and the lawsuits go away from the exchanges, SEC is suing Coinbase, the US's largest exchange, things will settle down and you'll find 1 to 3% allocations institutionally, which will add another $1 trillion worth of demand. And so I think crypto is probably a pretty good bet. And certainly within our portfolios, we've added to it. And we're doing some rebalancing because no one saw this increase in such a short period of time with Bitcoin. I mean, if your mandate is you're only allowed to have 20% in crypto and no more than 5% in any one position, you've blown out the walls with what's occurred with Bitcoin. So we have had to do some rebalancing. But that's why you see the price peel back a little bit. I'm not the only person in that situation. It's happening all around the world.
Okay, well, that really was the last question. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us once again here. Kevin O'Leary, thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Well, the US President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threats against Canada, Mexico and China have shaken up the currency markets. The dollar jumped as much as 2.3% against the Mexican peso. It rose 0.7% against the Canadian dollar, and on the Chinese side, the yuan was up just by 0.1% in offshore trading. Well, let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to Ambassador John Veroneau, who was a trade negotiator under President George W. Bush. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Obviously, tariffs are one way of the US defending its economy, but it also has implications for US consumers, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The evidence suggests, and many studies have been done that show that consumers, U.S. consumers, are paying a large portion of the tariffs that were put in place since 2018.
So what you're saying is that companies would typically pass on this additional cost to consumers by simply raising prices?
Yes, it can vary depending on the leverage between the importer and the exporter, of course. But for the most part, U.S. consumers are paying for these tariffs.
And just casting our minds back to the year 2018, when Donald Trump was last in office, and there were more tariffs during that administration. I mean, what happened then? Were there retaliatory tariffs put in place against the United States?
Yes, every action has a reaction, of course. So when the U.S. put tariffs in place, other countries, including China, put tariffs in place in response to that. And I would expect the same reaction this time from our trading partners.
But back then, did they have a detrimental effect, those retaliatory tariffs, on U.S. exporters, on job creation? What was the fallout?
Yeah, the economic studies have shown that U.S. exports were hurt in various markets. The U.S. Put in place a special subsidy program to help U.S. soybean farmers, for instance, who lost market share in China. So these interventions through tariffs have tremendous knock-on effects throughout the economy, which is why, at least until recent years, there was a tremendous effort over the previous 80 years to reduce, if not eliminate, tariffs. So they have a lot of knock-on effects throughout the economy.
And in terms of achieving the desired effect, which according to the Trump administration is to crack down on drugs and illegal migration, do you think they're likely to work this time?
Well, illegal drugs and illegal immigration are very complex problems. I think the president-elect is correct to want to reduce illegal flows across the border of both, but there's also a demand side of that problem of drugs, and I would like to see the president-elect announce what he plans to do to help reduce demand among U.S. users and help those who are addicted to these drugs, in addition to efforts to try to stem the flow across borders. But addressing only the supply side has proven over time not to be sufficient. You definitely have to address the demand side. And then secondly, there's a question of whether tariffs are the appropriate tool to be using to address these problems. Historically, trade agreements have been about trade and trade alone, and have not included these other issues, however important they are. But there are other channels and other remedies available to the government and to work with other governments to address those that should be used instead of tariffs as the only solution. But as the president-elect likes to describe himself as tariff man, tariffs is his immediate go-to tool for any sort of problem.
Okay, so let's just look at this from the point of view of who comes off worst. A 25% tariff on all products that enter the United States from Mexico and Canada. Obviously, this is going to have a knock-on effect. We've talked about tit-for-tat tariffs. Who comes off worse out of this, the United States or Mexico and Canada?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I think both are losers, at a time when, the president-elect won in no small part because of his focus on inflation and U.S. voters' concerns about inflation. Even though inflation rates have declined, prices are much higher now. And now we're going to see 25% increase in a lot of lumber products, for instance, from Canada that are used in U.S. housing. So I think Canadian exporters will suffer, and U.S. consumers and home buyers will suffer.
But do you think any of this is actually really going to happen? Or do you think this is part of a negotiating technique, some posturing ahead of some talks on how perhaps trading arrangements can be changed? What do you think the strategy is here?
Well, I think we'll see both. I mean, some of it is no doubt a negotiation, but I do believe that the president-elect believes tariffs are good for America. So I don't think it is purely a negotiating tactic, although that's part of it. But negotiations have to be successful, and in order to eliminate these tariffs, if it is an opening gambit, and countries, frankly, don't like to be bullied. And when they're, I think there are problems that are at the borders with Mexico and Canada that can be solved and should be solved, but I'm not sure that it sets the correct tone for negotiations if you start with announcing on social media plans to take unilateral action of this magnitude.
And obviously, lots of countries have reacted to this news. Well, in particular, Canada, Mexico, and China, the countries concerned. I mean, what struck you about the sort of reaction that we've heard from them? Do you get the impression that, from what they're saying, these tariffs might have the desired effect, whatever that may be?
Well, these are complex problems of illegal drug importation and illegal immigration in the U.S. These are very complex problems that people have been working on for a long time. So redoubling those efforts, I think, is a very good thing. But I think to the extent that tariffs will stay in place until these complex problems are solved would suggest that these tariffs are going to be in place for a long time, because these are vexing problems that have been around and will continue to be around. But as far as the initial reaction from both Canada and Mexico and their trade officials and government officials, I think, they are understandable. They're trying to be, restrained in their response, given the stakes. And they are trying, I think, at least in their initial statements, to temper their, at least the public discussion of these, although I suspect in private there must be great dislike of the approach that has been taken in this unilateral faction.
You're quoted in the Washington Post today as saying the following: when the United States imposes import taxes on foreign goods, other countries will hit back. We've talked a bit about retaliatory tariffs already, but do you think we are here on the brink of a full-blown trade war?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I hope not, but every action has a reaction, and negotiations, everyone likes to negotiate from a position of strength. That's understandable. That's good negotiating tactics. But no one likes to be bullied either. So you could see, a mood among negotiators among the countries where it's a very unwelcoming and challenging environment to reach a negotiation, because neither side feels they have the space to agree to something without looking domestically like they were bullied into something. And in China, for instance, there's a history of the Opium Wars, and I'm sure it's not lost on some Chinese that they are being now threatened with these tariffs in response to an illegal drug use at a time when many in China still remember the Opium Wars, where their ports were bombed because they would not accept opium from Western sources.
And obviously looking at China in the year 2024, with this threat of a 10% additional tariff being placed on the country, I mean, it's not 100% clear, is it, what President-elect Donald Trump has in mind with regards to this additional 10%. I mean, what do you think his options are?
Well, in the campaign, as you know, he threatened tariffs of up to 60%. So I think some reaction to the 10% may be welcome news that 10 is better than 60%. But I think that would be it would be imprudent to assume that this is the end of the threats of increases to tariffs on goods from China.
Okay, and of course the Chinese embassy in Washington hitting out about these latest tariffs. They say that there will be losers on all sides if there is a trade war. Are they right?
Yes, absolutely. It's why the Bretton Woods agreements in World War II, following World War II, there was a great effort through the WTO and bilateral efforts to reduce tariffs, because they have proven to be very unhelpful interventions in the economy that ultimately hurt consumers, especially low-income consumers, and create opportunities for crony capitalism, where friends of the government in power get special dispensation and relief from tariffs, and others who are less politically favored are hurt. So the record is quite clear that these tariff interventions at the end of the day are far more hurtful than helpful.
And just lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, you were a trade negotiator under President George W. Bush. How unprecedented is all of this, the imposition of tariffs or the threat of tariffs at the beginning of a presidential term? Or is this part of the political cycle? Is this just the sort of thing that world leaders do to sort of make their mark when they take up the reins of power? What are your thoughts?
Well, nothing is new under the sun. So there have been periods, at least in the U.S., which I'm more familiar with our own history, is, turn of the century, 1900s, there were very steep tariffs. There was a belief that tariffs were good, but that was proven through years and years of evidence that they're not helpful. They are helpful to a minority of companies that are politically favored, but harmful to the vast majority of consumers and the vast majority of other producers who don't enjoy political favoritism. So this is not new, but it's been about 100 years since these notions that tariffs are a good thing have been in the minds of those in power. So it's not new, and I suspect we will relearn old lessons of history, but that seems to be the nature of the human project.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate your time today, Ambassador John Veroneau. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's legal woes, or at least most of them, will not be following him back to the White House. Well, Trump was accused of conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election when he lost to President Joe Biden. He was also accused of removing large quantities of top-secret documents after he left the White House. Well, the court's decision is based on the US Department of Justice policy that stipulates that a sitting president cannot be tried or jailed whilst in office. Well, Trump took to X to respond to the charges being dropped. This is what he had to say. These cases, like all the other cases I've been forced to go through, are empty and lawless and should never have been brought. Over $100 million of taxpayer money has been wasted in the Democratic Party's fight against their political opponent, me. Well, Donald Trump is still battling two cases brought by state prosecutors in New York and Georgia. He was convicted in New York in May of 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to an adult star, Stormy Daniels. Well, Trump was scheduled to be sentenced in July, but his lawyers asked that his conviction be thrown out in light of the Supreme Court immunity ruling. Well, in Georgia, he faces racketeering charges over his efforts to subvert the 2020 results in the southern state. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Alan Dershowitz, Professor Emeritus at Harvard University and former attorney to Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Professor. It seems that most of Donald Trump's legal woes will not be following him to the White House. What's your reaction to this?
Well, they led him to the White House. I think many of the cases that were brought against Donald Trump contributed to his victory in November. The American public was sick and tired of this misuse of lawfare against him. They understood that these were politicized prosecutions, and I think that garnered him some votes. He will go to the White House without any federal cases pending against him. There are still two state cases, one in Georgia where the prosecutor herself is under serious cloud because of perjury she may have committed with her lover, who she appointed to investigate and prosecute the case. And then there's the New York case where the prosecutor said, well, maybe we should delay sentencing for 4 years. That's not going to work. So I really think that Trump's legal woes are over, and he can go on to try to govern without any impact from this lawfare that was declared against him literally the day he announced for president.
And supposing he hadn't won the election, I mean, a slightly difficult question to answer, a bit of a what-if question here, but how serious would the legal situation he'd been in prior to the fact that it became obvious he'd won the election, how serious would that have been for him?
Well, it's a good question, and it would be very serious. The Washington, D.C. case involving election interference on January 6th was going forward in front of a judge who was very, very inclined against him. So it's very likely he would have been convicted of a serious federal offense. I think it probably would have been reversed on appeal, but he would have gone ahead, at least for the next few months, with a conviction, a federal conviction hanging over his shoulder. The New York conviction doesn't really count because nobody can figure out what the crime was, paying hush money and not disclosing it on a form. That didn't seem like a serious crime. But the January 6th crime was serious and could have resulted in literally an imprisonment if he had not been elected.
Indeed. I mean, there are these four criminal charges that linger over the president-elect still. Of all of them, I just want to get your assessment, which one you think is the most serious and the one that perhaps could come back to haunt him after he leaves office?
Well, the one that is most compelling, the evidence is most compelling, but not serious, is the classified material. It's an open and shut case. He held up a piece of paper that was classified, showed it to a journalist and said, I should have declassified this, I didn't. It was an open and shut case. But many former presidents and office holders have shown classified material to friends or biographers or journalists. So that was the case that would have been the easiest to win, but it wasn't all that serious. The case involving January 6th would have been the hardest to win But if they had won it, it would have been very, very serious.
And of course, there's the option, isn't there, of Donald Trump becoming president again and then pardoning himself before he leaves the White House, isn't there?
He won't pardon himself. He doesn't have to at this point. I think the real question is, will he pardon Hunter Biden? I think he should, because Hunter Biden's conviction is also lawfare. It was based on his name and his relationship with President Biden. Nobody is prosecuted for failing to disclose a drug problem on a gun permit or for taxes when he's paid all the taxes back. That too is selective prosecution. So I think we may see a pardon there. We may see pardons of some of the January 6 nonviolent offenders. What we won't see is a pardon of Donald Trump himself, because he doesn't have to, and it would be politically costly, and some would take it as an admission of guilt. So it's not going to happen.
You've been a lawyer and a law professor for 60 years now, I gather. And back
Yes.
in May, you wrote a piece in the New York Post in which you said, of all the cases you've ever seen, and they were in countries like China, Ukraine, Italy, Israel, you said you'd never seen anything quite like what you saw in the courthouse in New York when you were sitting in the front row there. And I'm just wondering why you thought it was such an unprecedented scene.
Yeah, I've seen it all. You know, I represented Natan Sharansky in front of Soviet courts. I represented the former president of Ukraine, Kuchma. I've seen it all, and I've never seen anything like the New York case, because they just made it up. There was no case, and the judge acted like a tyrant. When a particular witness, a lawyer, wanted to testify for Trump, and he looked at the judge in a funny way, the judge yelled at him as if it was in a movie, saying, "You talking to me? You looking at me?" It was bizarre. I've never seen anything quite like that. And I'm confident that the New York courts will ultimately reverse that conviction. And if not the New York courts, the United States Supreme Court. It was an abomination. And the prosecutor wants to prevent it from being reversed by putting the sentence off for 4 years, because under New York law, you can't appeal a conviction until there's a sentence. So it continues to be a perverse misapplication of lawfare.
So Donald Trump goes back to the White House in January. He is, of course, a convicted felon by, as far as the law is concerned. But in terms of his standing as president, has any of this damaged him, would you say, long term? Or would you say that apart from the label, which will only be used by people that oppose him, he's walked away from all of his legal woes more or less unscathed?
Not only unscathed, but perhaps even benefiting from some of the overreach of lawfare. I don't think he'll be hurt. Now, when he travels around the world, some media will say, "Oh, here he is. There's a jury verdict hanging over his head." By the way, there is not a conviction. Technically, the conviction doesn't occur until sentencing, and there won't be any sentencing in this case, I believe, until after he leaves office, if it happens at all. So I think he travels the world unscathed. He will be attacked by academics, by people on the hard left. But I think that the legal issues are behind him, unless he does more things. And, you know, he is capable of confronting legal issues again. I hope he won't. I think he won't. I hope if he thinks about it, he'll seek my advice, and I will advise him to stay very far away from any line of criminality, which I think he would be inclined to do anyway. I think he's going to govern for the next 4 years without the imprimatur of a criminal verdict hanging over his head. I think that really is over, and I wish him well. And I hope he will have a good 4 years and maybe even bring about peace in Ukraine, in the Middle East. He's capable of doing that with his extraordinary ability to make deals. Now, deals are never perfect. Nobody loves the result of a deal because they're compromises, but he has the ability to bring that off.
Indeed, and that's a recurrent theme on this channel when we talk to guests about what we think Trump is going to bring to the table with regards to situations like the ones you described around the world. Just to be clear, for the benefit of our viewers who might not know your full profile, you're not a Trump supporter, are you? Did you vote for him?
I don't tell anybody who I voted for. I did not endorse him. I did announce that I voted against him in 2016 because I was a very public supporter of Hillary Clinton. But I've never been a political supporter of Donald Trump, but I did defend him against an unconstitutional impeachment back in 2020, 2021. And that led many people to think that I was a political supporter. But, you know, in America, a lawyer can defend somebody who he doesn't agree with. I've defended many people I disagree with in every way. But I've also defended President Clinton. I defended many people I do agree with. So I don't disclose, I'm not going to disclose my vote in this election, but I did not endorse either candidate in this election.
And Professor, Donald Trump says $100 million of public money has been wasted on all of these cases. It sounds like you agree with him. He's also pledged to use the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. So do you think Donald Trump is likely to be in retribution mode when he takes office in January?
I hope not. I hope he's in justice mode. There has to be some accountability for some of these excesses. For example, there's a group of lawyers who are trying to disbar every lawyer who ever defended Donald Trump, including me. They will fail, but they have to be held into account. And I think the lawyer in New York, the prosecutor who brought this absurd case against him, should be held to account. And I think congressional hearings will be held. By the way, the same thing will be true of the International Criminal Court. I believe the International Criminal Court will be the subject of possible sanctions and hearings about why they decided not to go after Syria, not to go after Iran, not to go after real committers of genocide, but to go after democratically elected leaders of Israel. That too will be brought in front of congressional hearings. So I think we will see criticism of the ICC in this administration as well.
And just lastly, Professor, I mean, obviously, going back to Donald Trump, I mean, he will go back to the White House as a twice impeached, convicted felon. But I'm just wondering whether you think what this tells us about the future of US politics and how many precedents, to what extent precedents are being set here, and whether this is the face of things to come, mudslinging and political, or as some would say, politicized legal showdowns really dominating the news agenda.
I'm afraid it's going to happen unless there's some accountability. I'd love to see a ceasefire in the warfare that's going on in the United States. I'd love to see Trump announce that he's going to pardon Biden, he's going to pardon some of the January 6 people, and declare the end of warfare on all sides. That would be great for America. It would be great for encouraging politicians to go into run for high office. But I'm afraid unless something is done, we're going to see a continued increase in the misuses of lawfare.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Now, turning our eye to Islamabad, where tear gas filled the streets today. This as the authorities clash with protesters demanding the release of the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. Well, ousted in 2022 by a no-confidence vote, Khan has since led a campaign against the government, accusing it of colluding with the military to remove him. Well, the former cricketer turned politician has been jailed for over a year, facing multiple charges, all of which he denies. Well, according to the local authorities, the clashes in the capital, Islamabad, have left at least 6 people dead. Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to Raoof Hasan, who is the former Special Assistant to the Prime Minister and spokesperson for the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who joins us from Islamabad. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Sure.
Let's start by talking about these deadly clashes close to the Pakistani parliament. People there calling for Prime Minister Imran Khan to be released from prison, and there's a sit-in outside Parliament, and they say they won't leave until their demands are met. Just tell us what the demands are.
Well, there are 3 demands, basically. Number 1 is release of all political prisoners, which have been illegally and unconstitutionally incarcerated for over a year now. Then we want the reversal of the mandate of 8th of February. And third is that we want the 26th constitutional amendment to be annulled. These are the three demands, that we put across to the government.
Okay, and Imran Khan's wife, Bushra Bibi, is pretty vocal and very much flying the flag for her husband. She's been calling for peaceful protests, but it doesn't look like they've been at all peaceful, have they?
Well, we definitely intended to launch a peaceful movement, and it has been a peaceful movement, till this moment in time as we speak. Unfortunately, the deaths occurred because 4 people, 3 from the Rangers and 1 from the military, they were overrun by their own truck because they ran out of ammunition and they wanted to rush away from the people in the process, their vehicle overran 4 people. And they died on the spot, basically. One policeman was injured, and he later succumbed to injuries. I am not aware of the 6th death, I am aware of 5 deaths, so far. Very unfortunate. Were very unfortunate, but they were none of that was the doing of the party, as I have explained to you.
Yeah, I mean, some people have arrived for these protests carrying metal bars and slingshots. That's according to reporters who are on the ground, that we can't independently verify that. They've then gone on to break through security barriers. I mean, do you condemn the violence?
Well, absolutely. We condemn the violence, and as a matter of fact, we've already done so. Well, we are not carrying any ammunition at all. I see you must have heard about the kind of lockdown, which the country has been placed under, and virtually, every street, every motorway, every expressway, every nook and corner, has been blocked, with containers, in the hundreds of thousands, So this kind of lockdown has never been witnessed before. But in spite of that, we have remained peaceful, and we intend to remain peaceful. Now we have arrived at the venue where we intended to protest, which is the D Chowk, next to the Parliament, in front of the Parliament, and we intend to stay there. We are peaceful. We absolutely want to remain peaceful, and we expect that the other party shall also remain peaceful.
Well, then you must disagree with the current Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, who says this is not a peaceful protest, it's extremism, he said. What do you say to that?
Well, Tom, I would like to take you back to when Khan's government was dismissed, and all that our party has gone through, and coming from the current Prime Minister, who is both unconstitutional and illegal because, he lost the elections, but they stole the elections, in the thick of the night. What they have made the party go through, our people abducted, our people tortured, they're forced to convert their loyalties and then forgiven, and those who did not convert their loyalties, they had to go through harrowing times. And some of them have still not come out. They're still technically forcibly disappeared people. And, in addition to that, we have not been given permissions, to stage our peaceful protests, which are enshrined in the Constitution. That's our inalienable right. And not even once, that permission has been granted by the district administration, while every other political party, can stage a protest as and when it wants to. PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, has been made an exception, and we are not supposed to protest. We are not permitted to protest. So this was the only way that we could have done it now, because it's now 2.25 years, since we were ousted, and we have not been heard in the Parliament. We have not been heard on the judicial front. We have been seeking justice, unfortunately, that is in this country. When there's no constitution, there's no rule of law, there is no respect for human rights. So in a situation like this, this is tailor-made. This statement coming from the Prime Minister, unfortunately, it just amazes me. It just amazes me. That's all I can say.
And in terms of where things head to from here, are you getting any signs that the government is looking at all vulnerable at this stage?
Well, the kind of people, who have gathered at D Chowk this evening, and there are more contingents coming, from across Punjab. So this number is going to swell further. Obviously, it is a source of pressure, but we hope that we have been in touch with the establishment, and we hope that we shall be able to soon sit across the table and talk to them in a manner, that we want to resolve this crisis. The prospect of us backing off, is absolutely not there. I think, when you're not given justice, at the available fora, then unfortunately, this kind of protest remains the only option with the political force. And this is what we resorted to. This is peaceful, and we will make sure that it remains peaceful. But we also hope that the other side, would respect that, would remain peaceful, in their own right. There have been threats, coming from various officials of the government, even the interior minister, yesterday said, that, if I ask the Rangers to shoot, then nobody will be able to stay there for more than 5 minutes, And there have been instances, in the last 24 to 48 hours, when rubber bullets have been fired directly at people, And I'm sure you must have seen them on the social media. Lots of people, with deep wounds on their body parts, they're displayed on the social media. So, if there has been any violence, that unfortunately has come from the government side, not from the side of the PTR.
You say you would like to see talks take place. How far off are we from a stage at which you and others sit across the table from each other and negotiate?
Well, there has been contact and there has been talks, in the last 5-6 days, Even yesterday, throughout the day, there was activity in the sense, that the government was pressurizing us, to change the venue of our protest. They wanted to give us a place called Sanjarani, which is about 30 kilometers out of Islamabad. And, they wanted, for a decision in that respect, we had to go to Imran Khan. So there were 2 visits, which were organized, Otherwise, we are not even allowed to meet him. There were 2 special visits organized, for our representatives to be able to meet Khan Sahab. Well, he said, no, I'm not changing. I'm not shifting the venue of protest, So he stuck with D-Chalk, Consequently, here we are. Last night, orders were passed, by the party leadership, that, in the morning we have to move to the coveted destination. And yes, we have arrived there. And we hope that the contact, that has been established in the last 4 or 5 days, that shall continue and that we should be able to sit across the table to engage in a meaningful dialogue, because that ultimately is the only way to resolve the crises, this country faces. Khan Sahab, in his speech about 5 or 6 days ago, is talking to the media after a case was heard, at the jail premises. He also said, that ultimately we will have to sit down and talk about these matters. So I reiterate the fact, that we are ready to talk and that we, in fact, are eager to talk. So I hope that the other party responds in this regard at the earliest possible, so that this crisis can be resolved without any unwanted, undesirable delay.
And of course, the protesters are demanding that Imran Khan be released from prison. And just for the benefit of our viewers, really, he faces 60 cases that range from corruption to the instigation of violence, so a wide range of cases. And I'm just wondering how you sit down and talk and how you negotiate a deal of some sort without making a total mockery of the justice system.
Well, the justice system has made a mockery of itself over the last 2.25 years. Unfortunately, the history of the judicial system in Pakistan has not been a proud one. And I've often written on the subject, with facts and data, which can be tracked, we're just typing my name out. The fact is that, all we want basically is that the constitution and rule of law should be restored in the country. If you just want me to confine to one, I would say restore the constitution, because everything else flows from the constitution. In the last 2.25 years, there has been scant respect paid to the constitution. There has been no rule of law, and there has been grave violations of human rights in this country. So what we want basically is restoration of the constitution. Once that is done, then I think everything else will flow from it. But this 26th constitutional amendment is a travesty because it establishes a parallel judicial system in Pakistan. And that is meant to enable the government, to select the judges of their choice, to have benches of their liking made, and then consequently get judgments, of their own liking. And that is that totally, because we believe in trichotomy of powers. There is the legislature, there is the executive, and there is the judiciary. Judiciary is it's possibly the most important of the 3 pillars, and that has been totally demolished. Unfortunately, this country now stands on 2 pillars, and it's wobbly. And we have to restore the sanctity of the constitution. We have to restore the sanctity of the judiciary. And that is what the struggle is all about. If the constitution is restored, then everything else will flow from it. And that is what we want. We stand and we have remained steadfast, because our leader does not want to compromise on that.
Realistically speaking, how long do you think it'll be before, or do you think it will happen, that Imran Khan walks free?
Well, Imran Khan should have been a free person about a week ago when he was bailed out. In the last of the cases, Toshakhana 2 it is known as. So unfortunately, he was not released. And as a matter of fact, another frivolous case was registered against him about an incident on 23rd of September. When Khan was in jail, He was not even out to be responsible for any such thing, So they booked him in that. Consequently, they did not release him, although he should have, technically speaking, he should have been released about a week ago when he was bailed out, in the Joja case. So the intent has been, to keep him incarcerated, not let him out. And they have seen today that even when he's not out, he has the potential to gather unbelievably large crowds, which no other leader in Pakistan has ever done. So after the Qaid, he possibly is the only leader who has this capacity to get as many people out as he may want to. So I think, while this will drive some element of fear down their spine, it should also wake them up, to the reality on ground. That he's an established leader, not just in Pakistan, but throughout the world. You must have seen the kind of coverage that he received yesterday. You must have seen the kind of letters, which are being written in the UK, in the US, in the EU, and virtually every country of the world. You must have seen gatherings in every Western capital yesterday, 36 of them. People gathered in hundreds of thousands to protest in favor of releasing Imran. So, such is his charisma, such as the iconic figure that Khan is. Consequently, to keep him incarcerated, is doing a disservice to this country. So let him come out. Yeah. And I think that will pave the way for other negotiations and other things which are on the table, to be negotiated, to be discussed and to be settled. But the first and foremost requirement is that Khan and all his compatriots, who have been illegally and unconstitutionally incarcerated for over a year now, they should be released without any ado.
I mean, you anticipated my next question, because 72-year-old Imran Khan remains, as you've been saying, hugely popular. He's extremely recognizable internationally, and I just wanted to ask you how you explain his enduring popularity there in Pakistan.
Well, Tom, I'll have to go into a bit of history on that. Unfortunately, in the past 76 years that we have been a so-called independent country, we actually have not been an independent country because we have remained subservient to our foreign masters, one way or the other. That has been a very unfortunate feature, And for the first time after the death of the founder of the country, Qaid-e-Azam, here is a leader basically who wants to make Pakistan genuinely independent, And I think during his tenure as the Prime Minister, he initiated some extremely delayed, steps, which were important, to establish that genuine independence. And unfortunately, some powers were not happy with it, and that led to a collaboration between them and the domestic actors, and he was ousted. But he has remained steadfast. He has not compromised. Let me assure you that he could have been freed within about a week of his arrest about a year and a quarter ago. But he refused to cut a deal. Okay. He said, "I stand for democracy. I stand for rule of law. I stand for human rights, and I shall not compromise on that. I'm not going to leave this country. I'm going to stay here, and you can keep me in for the next 5 years, 10 years. I'm not compromising." And this kind of resolve, this kind of character, this kind of integrity, this kind of such other things basically totally unseen and unheard in this country. Unfortunately, all leaderships have been compromised, they have been grossly compromised, they've all cut deals, whenever they were kicked out, they cut deals and they left the country. Look at Sharif, stayed in Saudi Arabia for 6-7 years. The Zardaris and the Bhuttos, they also left the country, He's the first leader who has remained steadfast to his ideals, to his dreams, to his passion. All right, that is what has endeared him.
Mr. Hasan, we're coming to the end of this interview. I just wanted to ask you very quickly, though, before we finish. I noticed that you have congratulated Donald Trump on his second presidential term. You put out a message on X, formerly known as Twitter. I just want to ask you what difference you think his presidency is going to mean for relations between Islamabad and Washington, and specifically regarding the fate of Imran Khan.
Two things I would like to see. If you look at the history of the US-Pakistan relations, our relations with the US have been considerably better during the Republican era than during the Democratic era. The history tells us that. So we expect for improved relations, when Trump takes over. Then too, when Imran Khan during his tenure as the Prime Minister went to visit the US, I think he cut a personal equation with Trump, with then President Trump, and I think that friendship is going to sort of hold him in good stead. So we look at improved relations with US on the one hand, and we also look at a greater engagement on the part of the US, to restore the constitution and human rights in Pakistan. These are the two factors, that I highlighted, in my tweet, and so many other people from the party also tweeted on the re-election of President Trump.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Raoof, Hasan, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now to an unexpected turn of events in Romania, where Alan Dershowitz, a staunch NATO critic who has praised Russia, is leading the country's presidential race after securing 22.9% of the vote in the first round. Well, this marks the first time in Romania's 35-year post-communist history that the Social Democratic Party, the PSD, that's the country's dominant party, has failed to present a candidate in a runoff, which is set to be held on the 8th of December. Well, Basescu, a far-right independent, has sparked controversy for praising Romania's fascist and nationalist leaders from the 1930s and 40s as national heroes. Well, he's also a TikTok star with more than 3.7 million likes on his account. And while Basescu claims not to be pro-Russian, he has referred to Ukraine as, quote, an invented state. Well, if he wins, how will it reshape Romania's political landscape? Well, to find out more, we're joined now by Iulia, Joja, who is a former advisor to the Romanian president, Traian Basescu, also a former deputy project manager at NATO Allied Command Transformation, and the director of the Middle East Institute's Black Sea program. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Joja. What went through your mind when you heard the news that the hard-right politician Alan Dershowitz had won the first round of the presidential race?
Hi, and thanks for having me. It's been indeed a shock and a surprise, not just at the international level, but nationally too. And of course, I was watching the elections as he was getting boosts in the election results hour by hour. And I think the main reason why this was such a big surprise was that in the polling that was done on a daily basis by several companies within the country, either by political parties or independent polling, it didn't quite reflect his ascendance, Basescu's ascendance. He started off with 3%, then he went to 5%, and just the poll on the day before the elections was showing that he could make it to the second round. But as elections were taking place on Sunday, voting intention modified too by 1%, 2%, 3% during the course of the day. So that means that his ascendance is incredible and unprecedented, not just in Romania, but what we've seen across the West and in the region particularly. And that's been the big surprise. He himself is not necessarily a big surprise. He's not a well-known figure at the national level, but in foreign policy circles, Romania is not a big country. He's been well-known. He's been proposed as prime minister more than 3-4 times over the last decade. So within foreign policy circles, he's actually quite known.
Okay, I mean, you say this is all rather incredible and that he completely defied the pollsters. As you're saying that, are you saying that the election was free and fair at the same time, or are you suggesting that perhaps there was some external interference in all of this?
Well, we don't know that for sure, but what we do know is that TikTok played a big role in his campaign, and that's what it seems propagated him from a candidate that again had no political backing. No, he ran as independent, to someone scoring with a distance as #1 in the first round of elections. And that's been due to TikTok. TikTok remains the most intransparent social media platform. And it seems like journalistic investigations are ongoing as we speak over the last few days since the election results. It seems that he's gotten significant help, which means IT, tech help on the TikTok platform, which enabled his incredible rise over the past week, just before the elections, reflected as such barely in the polling. So we know that he owes his rise to TikTok and to social media. He's been on social media active for the past few years. He was in the far-right party as their proposal 4 years ago in the previous legislative elections, parliamentary elections in Romania. But he was, after he was proposed as prime minister within that far-right party, as he was known online and on social media platforms active, he was kicked out of the party for being too far-right, ultra-nationalistic. And ever since, he's been building his profile, again, on social media platforms, but specifically TikTok is what he has used, and TikTok is what Romanians have consumed, both inside the country that voted for him, as well as in the Western European diaspora, where he scored with sometimes even over 50%, such as in Germany.
Okay, so let's look forward to what happens next. In 12 days from now, Romanians will go to the polls again for round 2. Of course, Georgescu is one of the candidates. The other candidate is the centrist Elena Lasconi. Can she pull it off, do you think?
I think so. I think it's right now, she is portraying this as, for legitimate reasons, for a fight between democracy and authoritarian tendencies, and for the Romanians as a referendum between a Western orientation, staying within the European Union, staying within NATO, being a staunch supporter of Ukraine, being a staunch supporter of the West, and increasing Romania's role within these institutions, which is what a big part of Romanians want for prosperity and for security. They associate the European Union with prosperity and NATO with security, especially with a war waging on next door, versus him who is openly pro-Russian, who openly doubts support for Ukraine, openly doubts NATO. And so this seems to be, in the next 12 days or so, to become an informal, if you'd like, political referendum between two extremes, if you'd like, when it comes to foreign policy orientation. But the interesting thing is what the two have in common is the fact that they are portraying themselves as being out of the system. As you've introduced the topic a couple of minutes ago, it's the first time that mainstream parties have not made it to the second round of presidential elections, and that they're scoring record low compared to the last 35 years. And that's because Romanians, both at home and abroad, are upset. They perceive the mainstream parties as arrogant and as having mismanaged the country. And so either way, whoever will become president in less than 2 weeks, it's going to be someone who is portraying themselves as being outside of the system. The only nuance here is that Mr. Georgescu is portraying himself as being out of the system and ultra-nationalistic. The problem is that he has very close ties to the system. He has been a high-level employee of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of the Ministry of Ecology. He is closely associated with people from the Romanian Academy, so all establishment organizations. And as journalistic investigations are starting to dig into this, we will see how Romanian voters feel about the fact that they voted for him as being out of the system or against the system, and then it turns out that he's closer than many people thought.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading your feed on X, in which you said the outcome of Sunday's election was, quote, a punishment for the mainstream parties for their arrogance and mismanagement. I just want to look forward to what happens next. I mean, let's imagine a scenario in 12 days from now where it becomes clear that Georgescu has won and he becomes the president. How much power does the president of Romania actually wield vis-a-vis, for example, the prime minister?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. There's been a lot of political infighting over the years in that, and I was indirectly part of that when I was working at the presidency over a decade ago. According to the Constitution, the president is the one that decides the direction of Romanian foreign policy and in national security. He or she sits in the Supreme National Security Council, where all decisions are taken on national security security. So indeed, he or she, President of Romania, have a very strong role to play on foreign policy and on security policy, but they cannot do that without the government and without the prime minister, because even these attributions, foreign policy and national security, are split between the executive and the presidential office. And so the president has some power, but they're not. It's not a presidential system like we have in the United States, best known, or in France. Is more of a semi-presidential system. The president has significant power, but not only he or she has the power. It's split between them and the prime minister. So it's very important who will be president. But the legislative, the parliamentary elections that are taking place this coming Sunday in between the two rounds of presidency are just as important. And so now we're seeing mainstream and non-mainstream parties creating alliances in order to prepare for both of these elections. And the outcome on Sunday will be also very important for the president.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Iulia Joja, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.